environmental changes, Academia Sinica. I will be the chairman of this panel discussion. So yeah, welcome back after enjoying your lunch box. And obviously we still, Professor Schonhuber is still being interviewed, but I guess we'll begin our discussion on time. Already 2 minutes late, okay. In this panel discussion, we have two topics to discuss. In total, we have 2 hours for this discussion, including a panel discussion from the panelists and also a question from the floor. So I like to roughly divide 2 topics into half, 1 hour for each. So today we will discuss 2 topics. The first one will be the necessity, urgency, and obstacle of climate change mitigations. And the second topic will be the dilemma of energy transition in Taiwan. So, the first topic actually tell us or to discuss how urgent to cut the carbon emission is, especially to reach this zero emission by 2050. And it seems to me that it's becoming a global trend, already promised by several leaders in important countries and also by UN Secretary General. And people are making that kind of a promise. So it's going to be big pressure on Taiwan because now our goal is still the 50% cut from the level of 2005, according to our law or act. Okay, so that will be a big pressure. So in order to achieve this goal, and what should we do in terms of energy transition, and what kind of dilemma we have? And I hope that in these 2 topics, our guest from Germany PIK can give a good advice or tell us how they achieve their goal or how they're going to do in the future, in the near future. Okay, so before we start the panel discussion, I would like to invite. Let me introduce the panelists first. Sorry about that. So I'm Fang Xiangsu. Okay. So we have 6 panelists. One is Professor Zhou Guitian from the Risk Society and Policy Research Center, National Taiwan University. Later he will give us about a presentation for about 15 minutes. That would kick off the whole discussion nicely. And the second panelist is, this is Zhou Guitian, Professor Zhou Guitian here. So when I mention your name, please raise your hand, right? Okay. And the second panelist is the Xin Dai, okay, from Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Study, Donghua University. And Pao Guangwen, the director of the Research Center for Environmental Changes, Academia Sinica. And of course, you all know the Professor Schonhuber, okay, and also the Dr. Klingerfeld, okay, and also the last panelist is you heard his talk this morning, the Professor Zhang from the Department of Engineering Science and Ocean Engineering, National Taiwan University. Okay, so before we start the discussion, and let's invite Professor Zhou to give us about 15 minutes of presentations. Okay,
okay, thank you, Chair, Professor Xu. So in Mandarin terms, is foolish birds fly first. 笨鸟先飞, so I fly first. Okay, so I usually think what is the main reason that abstract the Taiwan transition from high carbon society to low carbon society, and what is the main obstacle that our government, our industry, and our society delay to transit. I think this is the main topic I want to show in my discussion. So I have to give some components, discussion components about what it defines the high carbon society and what is the past dependency which lock our society in a high carbon past. And I will show what is the content of the brown economic package, which also sluggish, although also delay our state, our industry and our society to transit. And then we will give some foresight, Taiwan. So first of all, let us go through the high carbon society in East Asia. You see, in East Asia, the four countries are the high carbon regime or high carbon economic the bodies. China actually is the #1 emitter of carbon emissions, and Japan is the 5th highest carbon emissions in the world, and Korea is the 7th highest carbon emissions in the world, and for Taiwan's actually the per capita of carbon emissions is the highest by over 10 million population. So this is actually the reality. We see that in whole Asia we face the dilemma when we want to speed up the decarbonization. So for Taiwan or for many countries, I would like to say I regard the energy transition or the climate transition as a triple helix movement. Taiwan actually meets the vertical pressure from international Green Convention, also from the horizontal pressure from the domestic and the social requests, the many public requests that we have to clean energy or the clean industry. And there are three spheres. The first sphere is the energy fuel selection, whether we select nuclear power, LNG, coal-fired, or the renewable energy that generate this issue of the decarbonization or carbon reduction issue. And in Taiwan, the second sphere is industrial transition. In Taiwan, we have the heavy energy intensive industry, which must be reformed, must be transit. And the third sphere is the air pollution. As I said, our society requested more clean energy or more clean industry. And the air pollution issue now is a very hot issue in Taiwan. So I would like to give some reflection. Actually, from our research perspective, Taiwan's climate change and energy transition is far lagged behind the world. But the state, industry, and the society is still indulged in the brown economic package. In some debate in Taiwan, sometimes I think that is very boring because our vision still behind, lagging behind in the world. Our vision is very limited. And by this time, I would also give some the world trends. There are two main upper stream of global development trends. The first upper development trend is AIoT, and the second is carbon reduction. Our government actually likely prefer to stress that AIoT is the future potential technological innovation or the very important industrial basis that we must stress. But this is very important. But the problem is that our government actually ignore the issues, carbon reduction very much. This is a very contradictory because when the governmental agency regard AIoT is very important technology or important development trend, that would be AIoT also embarked the decarbonization process. So the problem is that in the mainstream of policy in Taiwan, carbon reduction is only look at environmental problems, not related to the future economic. I think this is the trend I would like to stress. And so we, from social science perspective, we try to analyze what is the past dependency. Actually, look Taiwan's society, look Taiwan's industry, or look Taiwan's governmental agency still in the high carbon past. So we will from the cognitive pattern, institutional pattern, technical pattern, and economic pattern perspective to go to review that. So first of all, we say that Taiwan's government sometimes it also remind the mode, the development state. That so-called development state is to stress the economic priority. And in Taiwan for a long time, we in the industrial enjoy the low wage, low environmental expenditure, and the externalization of the environmental cost. And the Taiwan industry also enjoy the fossil fuel subsidies. And actually in Taiwan, the industrial electricity price is the 6th lowest in the world, and the household electricity price is the second lowest in the world. So we can see, on the other hand, I will jump this picture. On the other hand, we can say the characteristic of Taiwan industry is actually got the low growth margins, low cost competition, but is an adaptable and fast learning contracting manufacturing model. By OEM or ODM, we actually got marginal profit. But in this productive mode, we can't through the challenge by the fourth industrial revolution. By the post-industrial revolution, all society, by Asian society, by technological or by the environmental or by the health, by the climate change issue must be reformed very much. Try to commit the new society or the new social development. But in the given mode of the Brown economic package, actually we face challenge. So this is the tension in Taiwan's the tension in Taiwan society, internal society, and also in our governmental agency. There are some debate now in Taiwan. But for this systematic stagnation, I would like to say that it actually delay our society, our industry, and our government to transit. This is the whole picture. So when we go back to see this social learning curve, if we still rely on the curve of the package by the influence of the Brown economic package, the gap will be expanded to the global low carbon society. I think that is a very important phenomenon now we face. So we can see this is a scientific data to show that the temperature rise recently in Taiwan. This is a Morocco disaster occurred in 2009. And by this the Brown economic package, there are some issues about injustice to next generation and also to the people in local. So now I want to go to see some real data that we see the carbon emission in Taiwan and how can we transit our energy intensive industrial to low carbon industry. So you can see this is the accumulated carbon emissions since 1990 to 2016. You can see the industrial sector contributes about 50% of carbon emission. And within the industrial sector, the petrochemical and the iron and the steel sector contribute the most one. And if you see that the contribution of the carbon emission and the GDP, we can say, I make the comparison. You can see that the petrochemical sector contribute about 17% of carbon emissions, but their GDP for a long time remain only 3%. Only 3%, and that the electronical sector actually now their carbon emission about 9% or the 10%, but they contribute Taiwan GDP is over 17%. So this is a very strong comparison between two sectors. And then The other problem, our industrial union has very strong advocacy on the government, and they have very strong discourse called so-called fab shortage. They urge the government have to tackle this fab shortage problem. They call it the Taiwan lack of water, lack of the electricity, labor, land, and skilled worker. But actually, this fab shortage issue is an artificial issue. It's a false issue because under this the fab shortage discourse, they want to still remind the development mode by the Brown economic package. They still want to enjoy the low electricity price, low water price, and so on. So seriously, that also by the industrial union, when they advocate the so-called fab shortage package, actually they are lack of the carbon reduction issue. This is important, and sometimes they regard the carbon reduction issue as the obstacle of economic development. So this is very, very strong issue. So according to our center, this Society and Policy Research Center, we make the statistics about the large 10 emitter in Taiwan. We can see there are some very famous enterprise in Taiwan. This 10 emitter actually contribute 37% of total GHG emission in 2016. And in these 10 emitters, there is only TSMC likely to follow the international rule. They signed the TFCD. And I think this is the package that is to say our main industry or our main enterprise can't follow the international decarbonization rules. But there are some opportunities. So according to our observation, there are still communication sector, financial sector, and also the industrial sector and the information sector. There are several enterprises likely to follow the international decarbonization rule, carbon exposure, to sign the TCFD, and to follow the rule of the IE 100. Okay, so I think this is the chance that Taiwan transfer that effort to this way. And to the governmental dimension, today morning, Dr. Lin already introduced the Taiwan's integrated policy plan. But from my perspective, we still have to stress the implementation effort or implementation dimension. Actually, since 1997 Kyoto Protocol, when every Taiwan's government will, I would like to say, every time when there is a very important international climate change conference or the Green Convention, that Taiwan government will give very beautiful response. They will also they would also hold the National Energy Conference or some Sustainable Development Economic Conference, and they will also give some scenario of the decarbonization path. But the problem is actually Taiwan's government until 2011, 2012, they still actually to figure out the high carbon industries. I will show that data about the the petrochemical industry. So also, according to our GHG Emission Reduction and Management Act, as today morning introduced, in 2013, we will reduce the carbon emission to the baseline of 2005, minus 20, and 2050 is to minus the 50%. But actually, according to this plan, until 2050, per capita carbon emission remain 6.5 tons. This far behind the international criterion. So the problem is that actually we have launched a lot of the policy and the project, but we don't have the very clear roadmap. And the government already, we can say they already noticed the carbon issue, but identify the pipe shortage issue as the main problem of the economic growth. They just try to tackle some problem by short term and without the long term policy design. And they actually sometimes they misunderstand the carbon issue as the environmental problem, not actually future economic issues. So they actually, as in our finding that the new paradigm of the low carbon emission is not in the cognitive pattern by our government and by our industry. So you can see within the governmental agency, we can see there are some internal struggle between high carbon and low carbon economic package. Yeah, they have some debate, and the government actually lack of the clear roadmap. And nowadays, we have to require to construct some innovative policy and regulation and some intensive. And for the industrial sector, they still advocate the brown economic package, so-called pipe shortage discourse, and they try to keep our government the development way to have the cheap electricity price and the water price and so on. But on the other hand, when we make a comparison to the German societies, the German societies have a very strong, consensus about the decarbonization or the green economic. But earlier or until now, our civil society mostly focus on anti-pollution or anti-nuclear power. So about the climate change issue or the climate change discourse is relatively weak. This is now the problem. But as I know, some civil society now want to transfer their focus to climate change issue. So to the whole picture in Taiwan, so I think this is actually in the middle place, and there are some tensions between different sectors by industry, civil society, and the state. So as the organizer of the conference committee suggests, that today we might to discuss that how can the government use their policy instrument of the regulation or give some incentive to speed up the decarbonization. I would like to say, all the picture, all the plans already constructed, but the problem is that we don't have the political will. Actually, 2 days ago, in the newspaper, I read that, during the presidential election campaign, now the electricity price increase is no issue. Okay, so I think that is the reality in Taiwan. So we actually need a climate action-oriented cabinet. Our president and our premier, knows this issue, but no, we don't do action or no policy. So you can say there is no language about climate change issue in the president campaign, and that is a reality now in Taiwan. So when we go to the societal aware dimension, we can see since the end of the 1980s in Taiwan, there are a lot of the anti-chemical movement. And you can see, and also anti-nuclear power movement, you can see there are a lot of movements. That this is Dr. Lee that the press conference by the S petrochemical construction project in 2010. Okay, and you can see there are different people. They went out to express their will. So I would like to say that according to our survey in 2015, I will show later the recent survey. In 2000 survey, it's already shown that the society like to transit their life way or their economic way to the low carbon path. And this picture also shows when we make the comparison of the survey in 2012, 2015, and 2018, you can see many people actually willing to pay higher electricity price to support the renewable energy development instead of the nuclear power. And according to the recent surveys, is over nearly 80% public actually concerned about energy transition. But the problem is that the energy literacy is very low. We can see, according to our survey, more than 50% of Taiwanese aged 30 to 50 years old believe that nuclear energy is Taiwan's main source of the electricity generation. But actually in 2018, nuclear power only occupied 8%. So this is the cognitive, very strong cognitive gap between that. According to that, we have the public referendum. This is another story. If we have time to say that. So I would like to say, according to the social learning curve, if the Taiwan society still remain the brown economic package, that would actually get the very low societal dialogue and the learning, and the energy literature gap will still remain. So we actually need to launch a social engineering of the public consensus. This is very important issue. Although we actually, our government, new DPP government, also launched actually energy transition program, but many people don't support that, by misunderstanding, So this is very important. And another challenge is actually now we face the fourth industrial revolution trend. We have, according to this trend, we need to actually, speed up or to enhance the dialogue with the public, with the society. That is very important. And let me go to the last dimension. Today morning, Dr. Schulze also mentioned the flagship report by WBGU, by the Germany Climate Committee. In 2011, they released a very important report called Water in Transition, a social contract for sustainability. And that in this report, they figure out the future development of energy transition, climate transition, and the urban transition. I think that is a very good model. So we have the translation of their summary. If you want to read the summary in Mandarin, you can go to our center website. And recently, in November, our center will actually formally published also the policy research report titled Taiwan in Transition. In this report, we try to set the pavement that how Taiwan to reach a decarbonization future. We set the low target, middle target, and the high target. The low target and the middle targets according the Carbon Emission and the Management Act. To 2050, we will reduce the carbon reduction to 30% and to 50%. But as I said, I think Dr. Lee is very strong discontent about that. So our high target is whether Taiwan in 2050 can reach the carbon neutrality. This is the key problem. But in my in my opinion, this is very difficult if we still remind that. So my concluding remark is that the whole society, government, and the industry have to transit the cognitive, institutional, technical, and the economic patterns from the brown economic package to the low carbon economic package. And the transition of decarbonization needs to construct clear roadmap by intergovernmental agency. Nowadays, the main job will be taken charge by EPA. This is EPA very important job, but other governmental agency might ignore it very much. And the third point is the social learning curve must be earlier constructed. Public consent is a fundamental social engineering by deliberation, dialogue, and education. I think this is very important for the Taiwan next step. And the next point is to set an independent climate committee to examine the decarbonization progress by national, urban, and the local community levels. I think this is very important institution. When we look at the institution in Germany that set the very important independent committee that can examine their governmental work and also give some advocacy or some reviews. In Taiwan, we lack of this institutional mechanism. So that is my final word. Thank you very much.
Okay, we thank Professor Zhou's sharing his view with us. So he has made a nice comment on this Taiwan's dilemma that we are facing here. So I'd like to invite our friends from PIK to comment on this issue and to share your experience and also the international trend toward neutral emission by 2050. Yeah. Please.
May I start? Yeah? Okay, yeah. No, so thanks a lot. It was very interesting. We also discussed it a little bit over lunch. And so the foresight thing, I mean, let me start with the following remark, and then we can later go into the details, of course. I was actually the lead author of that report in 2011, World in Transition, a social contract for sustainability, which was very influential actually and helped to sort of launch a really important debate in Germany. Sometimes it is good if you do a planning and if you want to develop a vision to start from the end point actually. Yeah? So we call that hindcasting, so to speak, and backcasting. So, for example, when I hear that the current plan is Taiwan to be half decarbonized by 2050, so by 50%, this is probably the least possible outcome and the least likely outcome of all scenarios, because either the world will not be able to fight the climate crisis, so we will have runaway greenhouse effect and things like that, then there will be no business anymore, neither in Taiwan nor in other places. Yeah? So you will be fully decarbonized because there are no products to be sold anymore. Or the world is able to get their acts together and to decarbonize quickly, China, Germany, US and everything, then no business will make any profit based on fossil fuels anymore. Huh? So a world which is, or a Taiwan reality which is half decarbonized is the least likely outcome of history. Yeah? So it makes no sense actually to even think about that target. This is not reality, it's just a dream, a brown dream, as you dub it, and not a green dream. So I would rather say, do the other thing, and I discussed this, for example, also with Sir David King in the UK, who did a lot of foresight exercises as the chief scientist. He's a good friend of mine. You could do it the other way around. You say, let's assume Taiwan is fully decarbonized in the year 2050. And then try to work your way backwards, actually. Yeah? So what would have to happen in the various sectors? Of course, mobility would be completely based both on electricity, battery, and hydrogen. And of course, you have to completely change public transport system. Agriculture will have to work more on a small scale, bioorganic basis, and so on. And when you would ask yourself, I mean, first of all, how in the various sectors could you achieve it? But of course, you want to be competitive also in the future world. So when it's very important to identify, as economists say, UPS, unique selling points, USPs actually, USPs. So what would be unique selling points? Because the development of Taiwan after the Second World War was, of course, accelerated by imitating American economy, European economy anyway, which only was possible by becoming fully carbonized, so to speak, quickly, and completely forgetting about the externalities, the economic externalities. If you would internalize them, you would have seen the prices extremely high. But ignoring the externalities and fully decarbonizing and emulating many value chains which were created somewhere else helped you to become a developed country with considerable benefits, of course. But this cannot be pursued any longer, clearly. So I would say start from the end point, and clearly it needs complete decarbonization, but try to identify unique selling points on the way. And as I said before, it could be, for example, becoming world leader in floating wind energy. I mean, of course, Japan will develop it and others, but why not developing novel approaches here? Another thing is, as I mentioned also in my talk, I think the architecture of the future will be based on natural materials again, not so much on concrete and steel and glass, but on new forms of architecture, but in particular on natural materials. So wood, clay, stone, and things like that, combined with smart materials like carbon fiber. That is, the composite materials will actually be the future. And there you could go back to the long tradition of Asian architecture and Asian art and Asian culture, actually, which was completely overruled by the American way of life after the Second World War. I discussed it many times with my friends in Japan who said, well, we just imitated the American model. So Tokyo was just emulating whatever, Chicago, New York City, and so on. And we have completely given up our Asian architectural traditions. But they need to be reinvented, actually, and the same is true for agriculture. Agriculture based on industrial practices will not survive in this world, because you need too much pesticides. I mean, we see that biodiversity is just collapsing before our very eyes. You may know that 2.6% of insect biomass are reduced every year now. So we will lose actually the world which we need for sustaining agriculture. So that's what I think. In order to create a vision, start from the end point, which is complete decarbonization, but on the way try to identify where your unique selling points are. And in the end, it will not be just imitating and catching up with what is done in Europe or America, but rather try to get inspiration from your 1,000-year-old traditions. And actually, if you think this is just a dream and an illusion, I discussed this recently with people at Tsinghua University in Beijing, and this is a very rich university, of course, investing tremendous amounts of money, and they also say we cannot pursue the post-World War II model of architecture anymore. We destroyed more or less all our traditional architecture, and now we find that it is not fit for purpose, really. So even if we include global warming, for example, you cannot just air condition yourself out of global warming. That's impossible. The energy use would just soar to the sky. It's impossible. That would be a few initial remarks, actually. So a practical suggestion, maybe it's very naive because I do not know the political conditions here, but if you would take away the subsidies for electricity and feed it into an innovation and transformation fund, you see, a sovereign state fund, whatever you call it, for fostering aggressive innovation across the board, that would be much more useful for the future.
Yeah, from my perspective, well, first of all, I liked that you brought a sociological perspective also to your talk, not a technocratic one, basically just focusing on technologies, but also on social processes. So that certainly will be key in winning the minds, but ultimately also the hearts of people in supporting this journey to sustainability. The question I would like to pose you, it's not really something I can decide with certainty, but I understood you that you see this as kind of a top-down endeavor. You're creating the conditions for social change. In my response to the question earlier on how to do it, of course, I also echoed that you need to provide information, that you need to make people aware of what's going on, make them aware of the risks, make them aware of the opportunities. But in my view, excuse me, it would be even better if you empower people to become actors themselves and to embark together, basically, on a journey of innovation, all levels. Because ultimately, it's still a search process. We don't know exactly how a decarbonized world will look like. New technologies will be invented, also new modes of social interaction. The whole thing, sharing economy, is certainly also a trend which is about to reduce our material throughput in societies, in developed societies. We may need less cars, to go around, and other things may be shared in new basically also models. So ultimately, my recommendation or my suggestion would be to really try on various levels to empower people and to have a social learning process and to be flexible when it comes to your targets. I have my doubts, and we have this discussion in Germany whether you should have sectoral targets and very clear pathways kind of for the next 10 years. Actually, we had this observation now, solar PV on rooftops is going faster. So what do? You cut back on another target? I'm not convinced. I think you should have this inbuilt flexibility for learning, ultimately in view of maximizing the speed at which you go. And then last comment on the sectoral targets. So I got my PhD on carbon pricing, so I'm more really come from the economics perspective. It's an open question whether you need to break sector by sector, whether you need to set framework conditions, boundary conditions, under which then all the sectors, all the businesses, all the entrepreneurs are competing, are innovating, and then some may just go much faster than others and may explore or open up new potential. And so I personally have the feeling that it may actually carry certain risks if you think too much in sectors, but rather set overall pathways, and in pricing, subsidy or energy pricing reform is a very powerful lever in that journey.
Thank you. So, Professor Dai, I believe you are an economist, right? Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, can you comment on this issue?
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Xinshen Tai. I'm working at National Donghua University. So just like our moderator, Professor Xu, introduced, I'm a resource economist by training, and I've been trained in Germany, in Deutschland, in the University of Heidelberg. So I'm very happy to see. Okay, I always say that Germany is my second Heimat, as my second country, home country. But anyway, yeah, today I would like to look at the issue from primarily an institutional perspective, yeah, because of my personal training. And actually, what I would like to say has been mostly covered by the talk of Professor Cho and also by the comments offered by Professor Scheinhuber and Dr. Klingenfeld. So I just add some points that is relevant to my personal experiences, what I see as a scholar in Taiwan. So to address the climate change issue, I think we have to overcome three major hurdles that are prevailing actually everywhere in the world, and especially I will talk in the context of Taiwan. And firstly, I think we are lacking of a very clear and ambitious vision. And this is because many people in Taiwan, they don't care climate change. And many others, they have no idea about climate change and the urgent need for transformation. And all these factors leads to social and political inaction and inability to combat climate change. So when we look at the Danish and German experiences of energy transition, the ultimate root of effective collective action has been always coming from the civil society, in particular, the very strong environmental movement, at least much stronger than what we have in Taiwan. Although the environmental movement is not the only source of political action. So civil society has been and still puts very strong pressure on political parties in Europe, and surely it can be in Taiwan. And they are always calling for taking action. So once we understand and recognize the central role of the civil society, then our mission as scholars is to reach out to the civil society, study the coupled socio-ecological system interaction, work very closely with civil society, and support civil society with with our research finding, just like Professor Cho has mentioned. And also take social and political action together with civil society, and also with other possible actors. So in general, we have to establish a comprehensive action alliance and take systematic, coordinated actions. So in short, we have to be involved in the social and the political process. And secondly, we urgently need carbon tax, or in general, the environmental tax system. Personally, I think without carbon tax that is high enough and that can offer economic incentive to reduce carbon emission, without all this, it's impossible to achieve any reasonable climate target we need. So we need carbon tax to trigger the economic and social transformation process toward information and sustainability. The Taiwan academic community has promoted the concept of carbon tax for many years. However, it's a political taboo in Taiwan to introduce such kind of a tax system. So most politicians and the general public are very, very reluctant to introduce carbon tax. And we all know the reasons. And the application of economic policy instruments has been overlooked and virtually excluded outside the political agenda. Surely, this is not an easy job, but we have to overcome the seemingly unsurmountable challenge. And this implies that we, academic community, and the research agenda should actively involved in the social and political processes, and taking serious actions to put carbon tax on the political agenda as soon as possible. For all these political actions, we should study possible social and political feasible options. But anyway, we as scholars, we have to work with all the stakeholders and actively participate in the political process. And the third one, encouragement the development of renewable energy is urgently required. Actually, in Taiwan, just like Professor Lin has mentioned this morning, we have started this process and get some progress. However, a more decentralized institutional design is required, just like Dr. Klingenfeld has suggested, in order to benefit more people, if not every person. And most importantly, this is to mobilize the knowledge and the passion of all the individuals, private sectors, and civil society. And all these are required for speeding up the energy transition and social transformation process. So I would like to take one very good example. It's the Danish Renewable Energy Act in 2008. So it includes a regulation which states that the inhabitants living close to wind farm, they should have a priority to buy and get some parts of the shares. And as I can remember, that's 20%. So this is a typical innovative institutional arrangement. But sadly, Taiwanese people know very little about the central role of institutions regarding natural resources, property rights. So that's what we can do and what we should do in the future. So currently in Taiwan, we got a very heated debate about the possible impacts of renewable energy projects on economy and ecology. For example, many nature lovers question whether solar panels are going to have significant impacts on wildlife, land use, and issues like food security. Apparently, we need more transdisciplinary research teams to work on those similar issues so that Taiwan society can achieve consensus about how we can use renewable energy to replace the fossil energy. For all these major issues I just mentioned and we just talked about, Taiwanese academic community has an urgent and a long-term job to do. We ourselves need transformation, and we need to embrace a new academic research paradigm with the following characteristics. The academic research should be problem-solving and action-oriented. It should be transdisciplinary and involve all the stakeholders, combining natural science, social science, and humanities. And it should focus more on the complex socio-ecological system interactions, because a holistic research approach is more required in today's world than ever before. So in the end, and lastly, I would like to say thank you to the Peak Institute, because on this year, August 7th, I, as a member of a delegate of the MOST, we visited Peak and other research institutes like IASS, the Helmholtz Umwelt Institute, and the Stockholm Environmental Institute. And we are so lucky to meet Professor Schoenhuber just in the meeting room. And it's a pity that we didn't meet Dr. Klingenfeld. Yeah, I guess you are very busy. But anyway, we are very grateful for your nice hospitality. And we do learn a lot from the practice of Peak and also the practice of other research institutes. So Europe in general, and especially countries like Denmark, Germany, and maybe Sweden, including some innovative and pioneer research institutes. They are really pioneers about energy transition and social economic transformation in the world. So I think we Taiwanese scholars, we can learn a lot from the European experiences. Maybe not copy these experiences, but we can got a lot of inspiration from all these successful experiences. And maybe as an economist, I think maybe we have to think about, in Taiwan, to think about some of the core values of a social democratic institutions. I think that's really the roots of a sustainable society, or in German, they call it the soziale Marktwirtschaft. So the social market, the social market economy. So this is a very, I think this is one of the most best models which are close to a sustainable society and economy. And that means, I know many scholars are sitting here, especially young scholars. You are just start your academic careers, and you may have learned some expertise in your own discipline. But in the end, you will find out that a sustainable society lies on some very simple but core values. So we scholars, we have to learn all these, and then we have the ability to demonstrate these values and also our research findings to Taiwan society. Thank you.
We thank the Professor Dai's comment and suggestion. I found that's very intriguing. Yeah, want to say something?
No, I'd like to. I'm sure my colleague here will also comment, but let me comment directly, because this should be a panel discussion and not just a series of lectures, I guess. So, because I would like to emphasize what you said and maybe sharing one experience with you. First of all, it's really interesting when it comes to renewable energies, that people start to worry about birds and frogs and so on. So those people who never had any appreciation for nature all of a sudden become defenders of nature. Right? It's very, very cynical, actually, and very ironic. We have the same thing in Germany, clearly. So a lot of opposition against wind energy, and people who never cared for natural life suddenly become ardent supporters of biodiversity and so on. But it's only because of the vested interest. Now let me later, because you said a vision is necessary and this needs to be discussed, what would be, if you like, a realistic vision for Taiwan, and this has to do with how we are creating values in 50 years from now, and it will be completely different from what we are doing now. I'll comment on that later. But what you also said, one of your major findings is that, yes, in a democratic society, in a democratic country, civil society needs to drive the discourse. We cannot just wait for political leadership. And I have ample experiences with that. So a few months ago, because I formally retired as director of the Potsdam Institute, Angela Merkel, so our chancellor, organized a dinner in my honor in the chancellery, which happens very seldomly, so maybe two times a year or something. So it was a big honor, and I invited a number of people, famous movie director, opera singer, people from private business, the head of the Protestant Church of Germany, who is very interested in climate change. So it was a very colorful sort of assembly, And we discussed, and in the end, somebody asked Dr. Merkel, so what can we do in order to support you in your climate policy? And he said, you have to form precisely these types of alliances, you know, between science, between artists, between faith communities, between young people and so on. Because she is fully convinced that we have to tackle the climate challenge. I have advised her for 25 years now, but she said, I can only move forward if I feel I can surf on a wave which is created by society itself. It's different in mainland China, where you can do everything top down. So you have a number of technocrats in the party, and they say, okay, we have to switch policies. But in a democratic society, the ultimate force is a civil movement, really. So, and for that, we have to join all forces. And scientists should actually not shy away from doing that. I mean, we scientists try to be completely objective, and in our scientific methods, we need to be scrupulous and look at every detail. But once we have found out that we are destroying the world we love, then we also have to join other forces of society. So we should not be too arrogant to say the survival of humanity is not our business.
Okay, I just found out that we have a strong German connection in the panelists. 6 of them, we have 2 German speakers, and 3 professors received their PhD in Germany, and even our director, Wang, has a very strong German connection. So, Director Wang, you want to say something on the issue? Or?
Well, the only German word I can say is Ich spreche nicht Deutsch. Sorry. It's very nice to have this opportunity to speak about this decarbonization issue that we actually are working on currently in one of our research projects. So I'd like to share with you some of experience that we have recently, and also some response in regard to what Professor Zhou just talked about. As you may know, that the Academia Sinica just published a deep decarbonization policy suggestion paper in June this year. This was after like 4 years of work. You know, the first action was in 2015, was shortly before Professor Sean Hoover's visit. A group of people from Academia Sinica, and including myself, and I was the one that presented a short suggestion to the then President Ma Ying-jeou to say that we need to do this decarbonization. Otherwise, Taiwan will face a lot of problems, both domestically and also internationally. And so President Ma, at the end, says that yes, he endorses the idea, and so the Executive Yuan and Academia Sinica should collaborate to form some suggestions. Okay, so we after that we set out to work a set of suggestions, and so the outcome was the suggestion paper that we published this June. And in about a month or so, we got a response from the Executive Yuan. And I should say I'm more than a little bit disappointed with the response. The response says that, first of all, Taiwan actually contributes very little to the carbon emission in the world, and it's just a small percentage of the whole. Of course, Taiwan is just 23 million people. You know, how much do we want to do? You know? And also, one comment is that it's unfair to use the per capita emission as a standard to evaluate. And of course, that comment comes from the fact that in that policy suggestions, we said that our current greenhouse emission law requires that the 2050 the emission amount should be like 5.7 or 5.5, whatever, tons per person per capita, while the 2 degrees C requirement is at about 1.7 tons per capita. So in other words, even if we achieve very successfully that the Greenhouse Gas Emission Management Law Act, we are still 3 times higher than necessary to achieve this 2 degrees C target. And so that is indeed a problem. And of course, after that, there are a lot of each department and ministry, of course, says that we are actually working very hard to achieve, and it looks like everything is a target. And of course, I'm not really talking about porcelain, and I know you're probably not the one that makes such answer, but it seems to the nature of each ministry and the department, they would just say that we are just doing whatever the law requires us to do, and we are set to achieve the goal. But our paper basically just says that even if you achieve the goal 100%, it is still not enough. And that is why we suggest that you need to do this deep decarbonization. And that is really the whole purpose in that. Of course, the general attitude of government is probably the same everywhere, is conservative, and they are always kind of afraid to promise that something that can do a lot of good in the future. So they just want to respond whatever problems created in the short time, and not something that they respond to, next generation or the next 50 years or whatever. They have to care about the next 4 years or next 5 years. That's probably what's important to them. And so that is our current situation. Our research program is still continuing to do, and we firmly believe that it can be done. It's really, situation really not as bad as our government thinks. I think our government working hard in response to the so-called 5 shortages that the professor just talked about, which is a very clear slogan. So they mentioned these 5 things. Perhaps I think our community also need to mention something similar kind of slogans. Instead of 5 shortages, we say, well, if you don't do this, you're committing these 5 cardinal sins. So maybe you want to think something nice to say that if you don't do this, you're committing these 5 things, and that's going to destroy our society. Which is really to Taiwan. As far as our research shows, that if you don't do it, sooner or later, not only that we are contributing to the destruction of this world natural environment, we are also going to face a lot of punishment from the international society, especially from those more progressive countries that have achieved their targets. And Taiwan is such a export-oriented economy, and therefore we cannot really afford to ignore those. Now, a lot of people will say, well, it's easy for you to say, you are an academic, and you can say whatever you like, and can you really do it, And some of my friends in the government says, well, you don't know how hard it is until you go into the kitchen, Maybe it's true, but I like to quote what Hans talked about both yesterday and this morning, that everything looks impossible until it's done, and that is really the case. We also interviewed a Japanese expert, Professor Mikiko Kainuma, a few years ago. And so one of the interesting questions that I asked her is that when she started to do the programming of these deep decarbonization pathways in Japan more than 20 years ago, And I say that well, back then you must have done some kind of projections into the future, what the technology would look like, and what the policies will be available in order to achieve your goals. And so now look back. Do you think you are overly optimistic or you are too pessimistic? And to my surprise, he says that I am overly pessimistic in the beginning. But she said that even with that pessimistic attitude back then, the MITI, the Ministry of some economy industry, back then already tried to chastise her, to say that how can you be so optimistic? You know, this is impossible. This is a mission impossible. You cannot achieve that. But she told me that now look back, that things progress way beyond what she could expected. So a lot of things just occur. And so one of the little conversation I had with Dan yesterday is about one aspect of this decarbonization is that, okay, so our government says that we are doing an honest job in doing this decarbonization by creating this new renewable energy, which is very nice. But one of the aspects that were very seldom mentioned is that how about achieving better energy efficiency? That seems to be nobody's talking about it. You know, why is that? And one of the things we always thinking about is like the building code. As far as I can see, for some very new buildings, the energy efficiency may be okay, but majority of our buildings here has probably not so good energy efficiency, and you use the air conditioning and the cold air actually leaked out very quickly, or in the winter time. Well, winter time we have a little less problem because Taiwan is not that cold, but in the summertime, really, this insulation of materials is really not well done. And Dan told me that maybe you can elaborate a little later how your house achieved these 22 or 23 degrees. You know, I think that's wonderful. You don't need to spend a lot of energy, and that's already saving a huge amount of energy there. So in considering those decarbonization technology, I think there are a lot of things we need to consider, a more comprehensive list of possibilities, and always thinking about the future possibilities. I think that is what we need to think about. So in short, I think there are a lot of these things that currently we think it's impossible, and including what Professor Dai just talked about, this carbon tax idea. And in our research team, Professor Xiao Daiji, I don't know if Daiji is still here, so he also said that many years ago he tried to promote this carbon tax in the form of energy tax, but it didn't go anywhere. You know, it gets stuck. So one of the possibilities is maybe the term tax is wrong. You know, we probably shouldn't use the name tax. We should use some sweetened word to describe this, because his idea was that we can collect the tax, and those big users, especially industry, if they use a lot of energy, that it leave a huge carbon footprint. They pay a lot of tax, but this tax will then distribute evenly to everybody in the society. So it's a form of income almost. It's not like a tax. So maybe you experts can think about some nice terms to describe such a things to sweeten the deal. You know. Yeah. So in short, I think maybe I'm a naturally optimistic, and I always think it's always possible. You know? And a lot of things back then we think it's possible. It occurs now. And just like when I was young, we woke up in the night just to watch the Apollo 11 landing on the moon, you know. And 10 years before that, who thought that was possible? You know, at least in Taiwan, I didn't know anybody thought that it's possible for man to actually step on the surface of the moon. But it occurs. So again, it underlines what Hans said, that you just go ahead and do it. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. So, Professor Jiang, you like to contribute something, comment something?
Yeah, I am the only one with the background of engineer, so I would like to have some word from the world of engineer background. And in the engineer, we implement and solve the problem. so from the presentation of Professor Zhou, we can see in Taiwan, and from the engineer viewpoint, is how to reduce the carbon production. And one main issue is the industry infrastructure in Taiwan. Now in Taiwan, semiconductor and steel is still the two major industry in Taiwan, and of course they produce the most carbon. And like the TSMC is the supply chain of Apple. Now Apple asks they use the green energy, and now TSMC even would like to build a solar PV, and they produce the green energy by themselves. They don't buy, they produce. They become a green energy producer. Yeah, and also Google in Taiwan also they use the green energy. And a few years ago, I remember the general director of CSC, China Steel Company. He asked me because they have some praise about the carbon right, because the steel company produced many carbon, but they wonder a few years ago maybe every steel company will be requested, or country will be requested the carbon right, and so they begin about 10 years ago. They begin joining in the development of offshore wind, and they think the wind farm, they own the wind farm, they own the carbon right in the future. Yeah, I think it's from the industry viewpoint, they give me some comment about how to reduce the carbon. And another question is like electric vehicle, like Gogoro. And maybe you have read the newspaper a few weeks ago. The Singapore Minister of Environment say electric vehicle is not welcome in Singapore because it's not green. I think from the carbon point, the question is not the electric vehicle, but the electricity production. If the electricity is still from thermal power plant, of course it's not green. But if the electricity is from the renewable energy, it's no problem. So like Gogoro, the charge measured in Taiwan is by month, not by how many times you change the battery or how far you drive. So maybe it's about 1,000 a month you must pay. If you park your Gogoro a month, you also need to pay the same price. So I think like this is an example. And in this application, maybe we can use in the presentation of Professor Lin in the morning, the renewable energy certification, and the policy how to promote and to combine with the electric vehicle. I think it's also a way in the future we can consider in Taiwan. Okay, I think it's my comment.
Thank you. So I guess we can spend a few more minutes on this issue. So I'd like to open the discussion to the floor. So anyone want to make a comment or to have some question for the panelists? You are free to speak. Professor Wei?
Thank you. This is Koyan Wei from National Taiwan University. I would like to draw your attention, including our audience. I think the key issue in Taiwan would be use or not use nuclear energy. In 2015, when I was the head of our Taiwan EPA, we had this so-called INDC, now called NDC, constructed. In that process, we set up 7 scenarios. S0 is the BAU, business as usual, and there are the other 6 kinds of nuclear portfolio or mix. And among those 6, the one which can cut down the carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas is the one which includes nuclear power. To the 2030 in Taiwan, 20% of electricity will come from nuclear power in that scenario. Okay. And then also in the same year we have this Greenhouse Gas Reduction and Management Act passed. It's also enacted. In that law, in that act, as many of you mentioned this morning, we have a long-term goal, which is 50% cut of carbon dioxide in 2050, which equivalents to 5.5 tons per capita in 2050, which is still very higher than we like to. So with that, I guess I'm trying to tell you that using nuclear power in that act, also in that NDC, is a crucial factor there, which accounts at least % of electricity generation. Now, in this government, current government, got the regime for 3.5 years ago. Looks like nuclear power will be totally phased out, at least, say, by 2025, as Professor Lin just mentioned this morning. So then I would say the major dilemma or kind of problem, a key factor here for Taiwan is to use or not to use nuclear power, because it accounts like 20% of the electricity generation in the original plan. Okay, that's my question. I like to address this and like to hear comments from you. Thank you.
So I guess the people in German has a similar issue or dilemma, and do you want to reply? What's your view about this? Or?
No, I can just. In the end, it's a domestic issue. You have to decide on yourself whether you want to run the risk and whether you think this is value for money and so on. I mean, in Germany, we simply made the decision after the Fukushima accident. So Chancellor Merkel was pro-nuclear before. I actually advised against it for purely economic reasons. As a physicist, I know about the risks. The risks are very small, but we have no solution for the waste problem, for example. It's a very strange technology where you don't know what the end game is and how to get rid of the product in the end. So it is, in a way, a bizarre technology. But I was not so much scared about potential accidents. So I argued against it because what I often show that the costs are simply going up and not going down as in other parts. But Merkel made the decision that we will phase out nuclear. And then, of course, the immediate reaction was, this is impossible to compensate by other forms of energy. And it turned out that no blackouts, people immediately adapted to the situation, and now it's water under the bridge. Nobody's discussing it anymore. Quite to the contrary, people said, instead of nuclear fission or developing nuclear fusion in the future, we simply have to better harvest the energy which is provided by the environment anyway. You know, the best nuclear fusion reactor in the world is our sun, and we simply need to harvest that in a more clever way. So energy efficiency plus better use of renewable energy actually turned out to be the road we're going down to. And I share with Dr. Wang here, I mean, we were under-optimistic when it comes to the development of renewable energy. Yeah? So this has exceeded every expectation, really. Yeah? So it's rather the mobility sector is difficult, where a revolution needs to happen. But when it comes to power production, and we have no problem whatsoever, really. It's rather the infrastructure, which is very important. But infrastructure means distribution of energy, which you also need for nuclear energy in principle. So that's why I mentioned before that, and this is very serious policy now in Germany. So every party, in a way, is conservative, social democrats, Green Party. Everybody is now debating whether we need to set up a transformation fund, a big one, at least 50 billion euro, probably even bigger, in order to accelerate the transformation. And money, to borrow money, is so cheap these days. You even have negative sort of return on investment here in this case. So it's rather that if you build the right type of infrastructure, when you can power the entire country by renewables, and you certainly don't need to go back to nuclear. And by the way, what you said, 20% of power production, this is probably just 10% or even lower in primary energy use. So it's not a solution at all.
A comment and a suggestion from the floor? Okay, you can think about your potential question and comments later. So I guess it's a previous the issue raised by Professor Wei and the comment by Dr. Schonhuber. Actually, it's make quite a good transition into our next topics. That's called the dilemma of energy transition in Taiwan. So because of we are kind of running late, so I would not name of these panelists and ask you to comment, but I will open it for you to make a comment or to contribute your thought about the dilemma of energy transition in Taiwan. So anyone in the panel want to? Okay.
In comparison to the international development of the renewable energy or the energy transition, Taiwan actually, due to some political and economic reasoning, delayed. This is the realities. When we observe that the energy transition occurred in European since 1970s or the 1980s, Taiwan actually had the chance to launch the energy transition since 2000. But due to some political reasoning, I cannot discuss that in detail. It's failed. There is a chance that in 2005 we might pass the Renewable and Energy Development Act, but that's failed. But at the same years, our financial ministry already launched the energy tax draft, but until now we don't discuss these issues again. So this is many reasons which actually obstruct the development. And on the other hand, in 2009, by the Ma administration, yes, that the Renewable Energy Development Act passed. But if we compare the development of renewable energy to Japan, I delete my slide. Taiwan also used the 4 FIT institution, but the development speed is very slow. It's very, very slow. There are some technical barrier. And for example, we would like to say that in Taiwan, we have our the electricity market is not liberalized. We have actually the national, national enterprise, Thai powers, they actually have set some barrier, but I think some problem that would be resolved, something like that. So I would like to say this is the one way to say that. And on the other way, when I-100 request more and more international company should use the green energy, I think this is very important for Taiwan. As our colleague said, that Taiwan is, Dr. Wang said, Taiwan is export-oriented economy. So we should be sensible to the international development. In Taiwan, our renewable energy quota until now is still very small. So TSMC faces dilemma, and the other electronic company, when they come back Taiwan, in these years, according to the estimation by our Ministry of the Economic Affairs, there will be over the 50 billion new Taiwan dollars come back home to invest Taiwan due to the Sino-American economic war. But how can we actually precisely calculate which company will come back to Taiwan, which type of company, and how many the electricity they will consume, and how many CO2 will be produced. I think this is the next important issue in the short term, in the short 3 or 4 years or 5 years. So this is important. But on the other hand, I'd like to stress again, internationally, that all the international famous brand companies are requested to use green energy. That is renewable energy. So this is a trend we cannot escape.
Yeah, just to react to this, in fact, from what I could learn, I don't really see, fortunately, that you have a dilemma here. In fact, you can be quite happy that you're not in the situation like France is, right, with a very high share of nuclear and extremely high decommissioning costs in the next decades. So I understand you've got 4 reactors still in operation at 2 plants. So basically it is arguably a cost that you can shoulder to in a sense, close that chapter. But at the same time, you're now starting to invest in renewables and you are benefiting from the learning curves that, to be very honest, others have paid for, including Germany big time, basically, with the feed-in tariff scheme over the past 2 decades. So you are starting your implementation and you're scaling it in a situation where many of the technologies have already matured quite a bit. And as Professor Schellnhuber has suggested, you could become an innovator and potentially a leader in the floating offshore, which promises to be an almost unlimited global supply of electricity. So I just want to maybe counterbalance with a more optimistic note on your starting position. Last small comment, just coming back to the other question that wasn't answered from our first debate. How about calling this, I didn't invent this, but it's it's a suggestion to do it that as well in German, to call this a climate dividend if you have carbon pricing, and then you can pay a certain share. You may not put all of the money you collect into a pot. You may also have to compensate, especially poorer households. And it's under discussion in Germany as a policy suggestion, basically, to have a lump sum payment back to people. So a climate dividend, you see something positive. It's actually being done in Switzerland already. So there are some examples I'm sure you're aware of, we can learn from and to phrase this in a more positive way. And of course, we also don't talk about taxing, we talk about pricing. So you price carbon, you reform, you set incentives. So there are many ways to phrase this in a more positive way. Just to close the bracket of our previous discussion on this one. Thank you.
Just a very short comment about these dividend things. That reminds me, when I was in US, the Internal Revenue Service always used the name refund. That makes me very happy. That every time they say, "Oh, okay, you fill out this form, and at the end they will get this amount of refund." And so you feel happy, but in reality, they already paid a lot of tax to begin with. At the end, after calculating, they give you like $20 refund, but you are still happy. So the name does make sense.
So it's being positive is very important, right? Especially for in this issue. Okay, any comments or suggestions from the panel? Professor Tai?
Okay, anyway, since we are here and of course would like to share our experiences with you, first of all, I mean this whole question of carbon pricing, however you call it, however sweet the term is, in the end, carbon dividend sounds nice. So in Germany this is coming to an end now and it will be implemented. Probably already a decision will be made on the 20th of September, so very soon, so 9 days from now. And it was a long debate over many years. Emissions trading, direct carbon pricing, national or European, blah, 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 lots of discussions. But now it will come along, and there is 80–90% of the public support it now. So we finally have made this process a success, actually. So this is very important, and you need to face it here. It's unpopular first, but if you change the public discourse, you can make the policymakers deliver on it. Otherwise, we will always hide behind the public. That's the usual thing. We'll always say, well, the poor people and so on, hardworking people, we don't like it. But if the public tells them that we are ready, we are prepared to do it, in order to become competitive also in the future, then they will deliver on it. So it is really, this debate is won in the streets and in the media and so on. So you have to do it. And science has to play their role clearly, because we are the experts. We need to take responsibility on that. Second remark, which is a bit more general, you are an export country. Why? Because you import a lot of things, in particular fossil fuels. So you have to sell things in order to buy things. And maybe this is not the best option for the future. So in Europe now we have a new commission, and a vision for the future is what we call a circular economy. And that is a very interesting thing if you look from the point of view of systems analysis. So complex systems is my major field, actually. And so you see, for 200 years now, we are living in a exceptional state of economy, which you might call a gold rush economy or an extraction economy. Because it started all at the end of the 18th century with the fossil fuels in Lancashire, in England, and then it spread across the world. But this is an unusual situation, that you are based on just the extraction of one resource, fossil fuels. And this is not a normal state of an economy. The normal state of an economy is going in circles. Of course, you enrich your culture, you develop new things. But in the end, the aim of an economy is to provide the citizens with a good life. And so I see that the vision really has to be, how can we globally, continental-wise, or in Taiwan or Germany, finally enter again the normal state of an economy, which is semi-circular at least, based on natural resources, the sun, the wind, things like that. It needs to be a bioeconomy, so we need to use in particular our natural resources. Digitalization will play a tremendous role, so combining sustainability and digitalization must be part of the vision, clearly. And in the end, it's human capital, really. A good life will be based on the people, on arts, culture, things like that. And it doesn't need to be, I don't think in the future we will make our people happy just by producing chemicals and steel. This is just an intermediate stage in order to propel us into modernity. So I'm also a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, as is Professor Lee here. And we often have this debate among, and this is a very a very eminent group of people. So I think 30 of the 80 members are Nobel laureates, and we often discuss this. You need a new narrative of modernity, actually, which is not just the extension, steel and black and carbon and whatever. This is the wrong vision for modernity. So how can we go into at least semi-circular, bio-based and human capital-based economy again? And when it may be necessary, or it may not be necessary at the same level to export things and to ship them across the world, so you can re-regionalize many things. So the things I know about Taiwan, it's an absolutely beautiful island, and so you have so many natural resources. You have lots of precipitation, water, things like that. So things people in other places of the world don't have, but you have to take full advantage of it. So the people in Qatar, for example, another country I know very well, they have no single surface water on the entire peninsula. The only thing is they have a huge gas field, and they drill this gas field and they sell the gas, liquid natural gas, for example, probably to Taiwan as well. And once it's exhausted, they have to close down the entire country, and we all have to move to Switzerland. This is not a very good perspective, I think.
Professor Dai?
Okay, about the topic, the possible dilemma. In Taiwan, we always have, many people are always arguing that there's a dilemma between environment and economy. And for all this debate, I would like to raise one nice example. It's Denmark. I've been always telling those people that Denmark, when Denmark firstly introduced the energy tax, that's in 1977, and at that time, the GDP per capita of Denmark is almost 10,000 US dollars. And in the year 1993, Denmark introduced carbon tax, and the GDP per capita is almost 24,000 US dollars. So let us go back to see Taiwan. Now we are a country with a GDP of almost 25,000 US dollars. And still, we don't have a reasonable environmental energy tax, not let alone the carbon tax. So that means Denmark has transformed a high value-added country in terms of economy. And that's because they have used energy tax and environmental tax to promote, to trigger the social and economic transformation, and so that they can have a more sustainable economic growth. And in Taiwan, even today, we are still trapped in the so-called brown economy, just like Professor Cho introduced. And that's just because we have never think about use reasonable tax reforms to trigger this transformation. So that means it's our inaction or our ignorance that leads to our status quo trapped in the brown economy. So I think this case is quite innovative for Taiwanese people. And we all have to think about similar cases. And personally, I think that Germany is also following a very similar way toward a more sustainable society. And so its transformation active transformation that makes economy prosper. And it's the political inaction and ignorance that makes a country poor. Yeah, that's the general conclusion. Thank you.
So any comment from the panel? Yes, please.
Yeah, I would like to follow the comment of Professor Dai about Denmark, because in the past 2 years, I visited Denmark very frequently and cooperate with Denmark Technical University. And they have the Department of Wind Energy. And the department actually was National Nuclear Research Center. And about 40 years ago, the Denmark government changed the policy and to go to the renewable energy. And the national level changed the direction and to build a very good test site and the test equipment about our wind energy. And then they have the department. And I think the department now is the biggest one in the world. They have many professors and also many researchers, and also the best test site and test reach. And why I would like to mention Denmark, because Denmark, the population is only 700 people. And Taiwan, we have 3 times our population than Denmark. So in compare with Germany, Germany is 3 times population than Taiwan, and the area is 10 times. So the population density is quite lower than Taiwan. But Denmark, they're a small country, and they like Taiwan, and they have after 40 years, they're leading the Vestas and Siemens Gamesa. They're together the leading wind turbine industry in Taiwan and in the world. And why we Taiwan cannot go in this way? This is also the just like I mentioned this morning. We would like not only to develop the wind energy in Taiwan, but also we would like to promote the industry. It's our chance, and like maybe in the future, the floating also we are looking for.
Please.
Yeah, so maybe next time you should invite Danish experts here instead of Germans. But I know Denmark very well, and even received honorary doctorate from the University of Copenhagen by the Queen of Denmark, who is a climate denier, by the way. She doesn't believe in climate change. So I had an interesting debate with her. But Denmark is a good example, really, because you said, because in the end, I don't know how you feel about it. People are too much dominated by purely economic thinking, in the sense, so what is the GDP growth and how much have we exported? But in the end, as I said before, the question is, can we lead a good life, actually, in the land where we were born or where we choose to live? And if I walk around in Taipei, so even in the small streets, you have to jump aside in order not to be overrun by a motor scooter or whatever. While if I walk around in Copenhagen, where I think 90% of the mobility is based on bicycles only, so it's so much more relaxed and so much better. You have no pollution, no noise, nothing. It's really an example of the good life, and in some German cities like Potsdam, for example, this is happening also now. So, I mean, let's remember what makes us happy in the end, and it makes us happy with our relatives, with our children, to walk along a quiet street where there are trees and so on. It sounds very romantic, but in the end, this is what we are aiming for. So a circular economy, which is not based on ever-increasing material flow, actually. We somehow have lost the vision. And a final remark, because we're in Asia here. I think you in Asia, in particular, whether it's in Japan, in mainland China, in Taiwan, in Singapore, everywhere, you have been brainwashed out of your traditional way of dealing with nature, with society, with harmony. Yeah? You have been brainwashed out of your original paradigm by, of course, American way of life and things like that. And it's very hard to get rid of that again. But even the Americans now know that they have no real future if they just pursue what they more or less invented as an expansive economy based on cheap oil, by the way, after the Second World War. So let's, in a way, de-Americanize the world.
Any comments from the panel?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. Yes, I enjoy these comments about the economical growth a little bit. And in fact, this is how why do we always have the growth? You know, this is one of the things I always puzzle because when I first went to U.S., our department always talk about, oh, this year's budget is the same like last year. It was very sad, you know. And I said, why is it so sad? You know, because you're just as good as last year. Looking this way, you know, but they feel very sad. And after a while, I feel that, this is the so-called growth-based economy, and you have to have growth, otherwise it's bad. But I want to comment on one of the recommendations we have in our last policy suggestion paper, is that our current practice of doing this decarbonization is sort of narrow defined. So every time so in our NDC or in our greenhouse management, we are specifically targeting at achieving these particular reduction and so on. So, but in order our purpose is to actually to limit the climate change. So in order to achieve this climate change target that the international scientific community recommends, it is better to have a kind of superior law that governs all these acts, so that under this law you need to apply certain, or you need to implement certain law to reduce the carbon. You need to implement another law to make the transition from this kind of society to the other kind of society and change people's habit, living habit, and so on. So we suggested a so-called Climate Change Act, just almost like what the UK suggested. And at this time it is still rather abstract. You know, what can we do in Taiwan? But I believe this is one of the things that we all need to think about, that can Taiwan actually enact such a climate change act to serve as a supreme law, and so that all other national strategies and plannings can go under this law.
Any comment, or perhaps we should open to the floor? Any question and comments, discussion, contribution?
So I totally agree that to set the long-term vision, in the stage of the energy transition, climate transition in Taiwan. Actually, as Daniel suggests, the first point, that's the empower people. In Taiwan, we have already many components about citizen power. Installation is okay, and we have also so many innovative social design, and we have also a component of the circular economic. In Taiwan, all the important international trends we have. But the problem is the institutional setting, and the problem is our government actually seriously lack of the long-term vision, and how to make the long-term vision to be deliberate, to be dialogue, to be educated. This is the main problem. So the PB enterprise president told me in 1990s to 2000 is the technique solution stage for then. And from 2000 to 2010 is the financial invest stage for PV company. And he said from 2000 2000s until now is the stage of the construct the social consensus. But the Professor Lin today morning has introduced the whole picture of our government and the path of the renewable energy, of the green energy project. But that's actually lack of this very important social engineer to build the social consensus. Nowadays, when we construct the PV, we face economic, we face ecological struggle in some place, and the people, some people think about renewable energy too expensive, like offshore wind power. So that need to be deliberate, need to be dialogue, and to set a new vision. I think that is very important. And Dr. Schneeschubel also mentioned that earlier in Taiwan or in Korea, in Asian country, we actually imitate the American lifestyle. And nowadays, how can we actually put our step to go for to reflect what is actually the lifestyle of the modernity in Asia? I think this is very important. So but we have our dilemma and we have our problem, but I think that must be tackled in the long term, middle term, or short term. And for the institutional setting, I think this is also very important about the carbon pricing, including the carbon trading or including the energy tax. This is already when Professor Xiao Daiji stands here, he will say he is disappointment. Since 20 years ago, he has started to conduct research about energy tax, about the carbon pricing, but that is no implementation by every government. So I think the problem is how to actually set the implementation by the institutional setting. And by setting the institution, that needs very big dialogue in our society. I think this is what I suggested. Thank you.
I know our time is running out, but the idea is to just exchange experiences and compare notes. And, we need to use our imagination if we want to face the challenges we have ahead of us. And on the one hand, sometimes it's good to just remember about our cultural heritage, which is in particular rich in Asia. But the other thing is to look for new formats of decision making. And as I said, I was member of a civil society body consisting of 28 people who had to devise a transition plan, a phase-out plan for coal power in Germany, or the coal use across the board, which is an unprecedented thing. So when it was decided to phase out nuclear, that was decided in a lonely decision by the government. But this time we set up a civil society body. And I learned that France is imitating that now. So we will set up a citizen council on climate consisting of 150 people. And many of them are sort of selected by a lottery, actually. So just in a random number way. And maybe it might be useful, I don't know about the political realities in this country, but creating a climate citizen council here in Taiwan, maybe consisting of 50 people or something like that, from all walks of society, young people as well as elderly people and so on, scientists, experts, engineers, farmers and so on. That could be a very interesting exercise, and it cannot be ignored in the end by politicians. It would be a very powerful thing, so just a suggestion.
Okay, so we still have about 1 minute left. So I like to exercise my power as a chairman to use up all the rest of the 1 minute. So sorry about that. Please bear with me. So in my recent study of this zero emission by 2050, I found two kind of person are very important. It probably seem to me the main driver of recent the current trend toward the zero emission by 2050. Women and young girl or young people. So, for example, I'd like to mention the female politician, like a former UK Prime Minister, Theresa May, commit to 50% to the zero emission by 2050. Also, the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, also make the same pledgement. And the Tokyo City Mayor, Yuriko Koike, says the same thing. And the US Senator Elizabeth Warren actually is promoting the Green New Deal to cut emission to zero by 2050. And also the newly elected or next president of European emission, another currently the German defense minister. Sorry, I do not know how to pronounce her name, so bear with me. Also,
So it's
making
Ursula von der Leyen.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. So also make the same approachment. And at the end of this discussion, by quoting a statement by this very famous young lady, you know what I'm referring to, Greta Thunberg. And I watched his video from COP26 or something last year. Tear coming out of my eyes. I almost, it was so touching. I like to quote her statements. Adults keep saying we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day, and then I want you to act. I want you to act as if your house is on fire, because it is. Okay, with this, I end this discussion, and thank you. Thank all the panelists and all your participation. Thank you very much.